Sometimes the loudest faith is the quietest walk. We live in a world that teaches us to broadcast every move, to prove ourselves before we've even arrived. But can I tell you something tonight? There is a power in not needing the applause to keep moving. There is strength in trusting God even when you can't trace him. There is power in quiet confidence. See, when you really believe what God said about you, you don't have to shout it from the rooftops. You just start walking like it's already yours. You don't need a cheer section when heaven is already backing you. You don't need validation when you've got vision. So tonight, I want to talk to the woman, the man, the soul who's been moving in silence, who's been wondering if God still sees them. I want to speak to the person who's been walking quietly but faithfully, waiting for something to break. Let me tell you, God hears silent prayers. He honors silent battles, and he moves in quiet places. What he's building in you in the dark will shift everything in the light. This is about trusting God when nobody's watching. This is about walking in rooms you never announced you were coming to. This is about the power of quiet confidence. Confidence doesn't require noise, just clarity. In a world that equates volume with value, it's easy to believe that if you're not being seen or heard, you're not doing enough. But real confidence isn't always loud. It doesn't need to prove, perform, or proclaim. It simply knows. It knows who it is, what it's been called to do, and most importantly, who it's been called by. So many people are busy trying to convince others of their worth, posting, shouting, performing, hoping someone will validate what they're still unsure of within. But true confidence, the kind that's anchored in clarity, doesn't look outward for confirmation. It moves from a place of inner conviction. You don't have to tell the world what you're about to do when you know that God already spoke it to your spirit. God already planted a seed in that clarity becomes your compass. It grounds you when the crowd doesn't cheer. It keeps you steady when no one's watching. It reminds you that your value was never determined by their applause anyway. When you have clarity about who you are in God, you begin to understand that the noise is often a distraction. You don't need to announce your every move. You don't have to over-explain your silence or your shift. Some of the most powerful moves you'll ever make in life will be the quiet ones, the ones nobody saw coming but were birthed out of clarity and communion with God. This kind of clarity produces a stillness in your spirit, not passivity, but peace. It's a calm that comes from knowing you don't have to fight for a seat at the table when God already built the room with you in mind. There's something holy about being so clear on your assignment that you don't waste time defending it. You don't argue with people who don't understand. You don't seek permission to be powerful. You just walk it out quietly, intentionally, boldly. Because clarity breeds confidence, and confidence keeps you from being shaken by every opinion, every delay, every closed door. It's what allows you to keep moving even when no one's cheering you on. Noise is often a cover for confusion, but when you're clear, you can be still. You can be silent. You can trust the process without performing for approval. That's the power of quiet confidence. It flows from a heart that's been anchored in truth. Not just the truth of your talent or your potential, but the truth of God's word over your life. When that becomes your foundation, you no longer need to chase platforms. You become the platform. You no longer need to seek spotlight. You shine from within. Confidence doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be sure. And when you are sure, you become unshakable. God does his best work in hidden seasons. It's in the unseen, uncelebrated, and often uncomfortable places that God begins to shape what will eventually be revealed. We live in a time where visibility feels like validation, and if no one sees what we're doing, we start to believe it doesn't matter. But God's process is not public. It's personal, and it usually begins in the dark. Before a seed becomes a tree, it is buried, hidden, pressed into the soil with no spotlight, no applause, no recognition. But that darkness is not death. It's development. That's where the roots grow deep. That's where identity is formed. That's where faith is tested and refined. God doesn't skip this part of the process because he knows what's being built in silence will need to withstand the storms that come in the spotlight. Some of the most anointed, powerful, and impactful people are the ones who went through a season of being hidden, not because they were forgotten, but because they were being fortified. When God hides you, he's not punishing you. He's protecting the purpose he's planted in you. He's pulling you away from distractions, from opinions, from the noise, so that you can hear his voice clearly. Because what he wants to do in you can't be contaminated by public pressure. He's working in your character, your mindset, your habits. He's showing you who you really are when nobody's watching. That's not rejection. That's preparation. Sometimes we cry out to God asking for visibility, but we don't realize we're not yet ready for it. God's silence doesn't mean he's not working. It means he's working in deeper ways than we can see. There are things he's setting in order. There are wounds he's healing. There's wisdom he's depositing. There's discernment he's sharpening. And all of it is happening behind the scenes while we're wondering if he's still paying attention. But God never wastes a season. The hidden place is sacred. It's where intimacy is formed. It's where reliance is deepened. It's where we begin to trust him, not for what he gives us, but for who he is. When everything feels quiet and uneventful, when the doors aren't opening and the opportunities aren't arriving, that's often when God is closest. Not in the way we expect, but in the way we need. We just don't always recognize him in the soil. But that's where he shapes the kind of strength you don't get from platforms. That's where he teaches you to worship without a stage, to lead without proof. God's best work is done in places where ego can't survive and pride can't grow. He isolates to elevate. He hides to protect. He delays to develop. So if you find yourself in a season where it feels like nothing is happening, remember that hidden seasons are holy ground. Movement in silence is still movement in power. We often think that for progress to be real, it has to be visible. That if people can't see what we're doing, then maybe it's not significant. But God doesn't measure impact the way the world does. He sees movement in obedience, even when it's quiet. He honors the steps taken in faith, even when no one else notices. You don't need to be loud to be effective. You just need to be led. Some of the most powerful transformations happen in silence. There's no announcement, no spotlight, no crowd cheering you on, just you and God moving together. And that kind of movement is sacred. That's the kind of progress that builds foundation, not just momentum. You don't need to broadcast every step when you know you're being guided by something greater than applause. Movement in silence is the kind of faith that says, I don't need a witness to obey. We live in a culture that promotes performance over process. But silent movement isn't lack of ambition, it's proof of maturity. It's choosing to build when no one's watching. It's choosing to heal without posting about it. It's choosing to grow without needing recognition. Silent movement is spiritual strength. It shows that your trust is in God's timing, not people's timelines. That your fuel is purpose, not pressure. When God gives you a word, he's not always going to give you an audience. Sometimes he gives you instruction in private that requires execution in silence. That means you might be building something big in a quiet place. That means your yes to God might not come with claps and congratulations. It might come with isolation and discipline, but that doesn't make it any less powerful. It actually makes it more so because it proves that you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for him. There's a weight to silent obedience. It stretches you. It tests your patience. It forces you to wrestle with your insecurities, with your need to be seen, with your desire to be validated. But once you get past all that, what's left is real. It's pure. It's rooted. Movement in silence allows God to work on what's underneath so that when the time comes for you to be seen, you won't be shaken. Because you'll know that what's visible is only the fruit of what was formed in the quiet. You can't underestimate what God is doing through you just because it's not public. Every quiet step forward, every silent decision to keep going, every private moment of surrender, he sees all of it, and he's using all of it. Just because it's not loud doesn't mean it's not loaded with purpose. Sometimes the greatest power is in the steps no one else sees, the prayers no one else hears, in the process no one else understands. Validation isn't necessary when you're walking in obedience. One of the deepest struggles many of us face is the need to be understood, accepted, and affirmed by others. We crave reassurance that we're on the right path, that our efforts matter, that someone sees us. But the truth is, when God calls you to something, he may not call a crowd to confirm it. Obedience doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, solitude, or even misunderstanding. And yet it's still holy, it's still necessary, it's still enough. Walking in obedience means moving even when no one claps. It means saying yes when it makes no sense to the people around you. It means trusting what God whispered to your spirit, even when others question your direction, because the call on your life is not a conference call. God didn't need to consult others when he placed purpose in you. So why do we keep asking people for permission to do what God already commanded? The need for validation will always compete with your ability to obey. If you wait for people to approve your assignment, you may never start it. If you rely on constant affirmation to keep going, you may not last through the silent seasons. True obedience is anchored in trust. Trust that God sees what others don't, knows what you can't, and has already made a way where you see none. That kind of trust silences the need for human confirmation. There will be times when people misunderstand your obedience. They'll say you changed. They'll question your motives. They'll try to shrink what you're building to fit their level of comfort. But that's not your burden to carry. Obedience is between you and God. He's the one who gave you the vision, and he's the one responsible for bringing it to pass. Your job is to walk it out, even when it's lonely, even when it's quiet, even when it costs you comfort or connection. Sometimes the absence of validation is the very thing God uses to test your heart. Will you still obey if no one cheers? Will you still follow him if it leads away from everything familiar? Will you still trust him if no one else understands? These are the questions that refine you. They strip away the layers of insecurity, pride, and people-pleasing. They force you to anchor your confidence, not in the crowd, but in the Creator. Obedience will ask you to move before you feel ready. It will ask you to step out with no guarantees. And in those moments, you'll realize that obedience isn't about the outcome. It's about surrender. It's about trusting God more than you trust your own understanding or other people's opinions. You'll realize that being validated by God carries more weight than being validated by people. Because when God affirms you, no amount of rejection can unwrite what he's already declared over your life. Faith is louder than fear, even when unspoken. Fear often shouts, demanding your attention with worst-case scenarios, uncertainty, and doubt. It makes noise in your mind, creates chaos in your emotions, and convinces you that you're not ready, not worthy, not enough. But faith, even when it's quiet, holds a deeper volume. It doesn't always scream back at fear, but it stands firm in the presence of it. Faith whispers truth when fear is yelling lies. And it's in that whisper that strength is born. You don't have to feel bold to be faithful. Faith isn't always loud, dramatic, or outwardly expressive. Sometimes faith is silent resolve. It's getting out of bed when you don't feel like it. It's applying for the opportunity knowing you've been rejected before. It's choosing to believe in healing when the diagnosis hasn't changed. It's doing the next right thing even when nothing makes sense. That quiet determination, that unshakable decision to trust God anyway, that's louder than any fear trying to paralyze you. There's something powerful about a person who moves in faith without having to announce it. You can tell when someone's been with God by the way they carry peace in chaos. You can tell by the way they don't let fear dictate their next move. Faith doesn't mean you never feel fear. It means you don't let fear make your choices. Faith will walk straight into the unknown knowing that God has already gone ahead. It will walk through storms without demanding an immediate calm because it trusts the one who commands the winds and the waves. Fear thrives on visibility. It wants you to fixate on everything that looks impossible. Faith operates in the unseen. It believes what hasn't been manifested yet. It sees beyond the now and into the promise. Faith leans into what God said, not just what your eyes see. And that kind of faith doesn't need an audience or affirmation. It just needs agreement with God, with His word, and with the purpose He placed inside you. Sometimes faith doesn't roar, it rests. It holds its ground when fear tries to push. It declares without words that it will not be moved. And even though that kind of faith may not make headlines, it makes history. That's the faith that builds legacies. That's the faith that breaks generational cycles. That's the faith that says, I might be trembling, but I'm still moving forward. When fear says, what if? Faith responds with even if. Even if it doesn't happen the way I hoped, even if I have to walk this alone, even if the outcome is uncertain, faith still believes. Faith still moves. Faith still stands. And when all is said and done, it's not the loudest voice in the room that carries the most power. It's the one that's anchored in truth. Your quiet season is preparation, not punishment. It's easy to misinterpret silence as neglect, stillness as failure, and hiddenness as rejection. When the doors don't open, when the calls don't come, when it seems like everything has slowed down or stopped altogether, the enemy loves to whisper that you've been forgotten. But that season, the one where nothing seems to be moving, is often the very space where God is moving the most. Not in public, not in ways you can post about, but deep within you, in places you didn't even know needed healing, realignment, or strengthening. God doesn't waste silence. He uses it. He uses it to strip away the noise that's been clouding your clarity. He uses it to remove the distractions that were subtly pulling you off course. He uses it to bring you back to the core of your identity, back to who you are when there's no platform, no recognition, and no reward. That's where the real work happens. The quiet season is where character is built, where endurance is tested, where faith is deepened, and where your motives are purified. It's where God checks if you're more committed to His voice than to visible results. Preparation seasons are uncomfortable because they don't come with instant gratification. They often require letting go of what you thought life would look like by now. They demand trust when answers are absent and persistence when progress isn't obvious. But God is strategic. He knows what's ahead of you, and He's preparing you to carry it well. What feels like delay is actually divine timing. What looks like restriction is really you're not behind. You're being equipped. You may be tempted to look around and compare. Other people seem to be moving forward, getting noticed, being promoted. It's tempting to question your path, your pace, even your purpose. But what you don't see are the silent battles they may be fighting, or the hidden cracks in what was built too fast. God's preparation is thorough. He's not just preparing the blessing for you, He's preparing you for the blessing. And that takes time, depth, and surrender. Quiet seasons are sacred. They teach you to hear God without the static of external affirmation. They teach you to rely on His voice instead of their opinions. They teach you to obey without the reward being immediately visible. That obedience, birthed in silence, becomes the foundation of unshakable purpose. When the next season comes, and it will, you'll realize that you needed this stillness to stabilize you for the next stretch of your calling. So don't despise the quiet. Don't rush through the hidden moments. They are not empty. They are rich with growth. What God is doing in you now is laying the groundwork for what He will do through you later. There is power in preparation, even when it looks like nothing is happening. There is grace in the silence. Even when your heart is full of questions,